The New Testament reading is from the book of Romans, the 13th chapter, verses 8 through 10. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, or any other commandment are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Faith comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through the word of Christ. The congregation may be seated. When Amanda and the kids and I lived in Kodiak, Alaska, I became friends with the local judge. Now, we thought that there were a lot of jokes that could come from this, that the pastor and the judge were walking down the beach. We just never figured out what the punchline was. But we were about the same age, had kids that were about the same age, and we became fast friends. And at the end of the year that we lived there, I told Judge Dawson I was a little nervous when we first became friends to be friends with the judge. I was afraid I might do something wrong. Well, he laughed and he said, "Well, Pastor Joe, I was a little nervous becoming friends with the pastor, afraid I might do something wrong." We were working with two different kinds of law: the civil law and God's law. Today's text is a part of God's law, the Ten Commandments. About a month ago on Rally Sunday, I talked about the narrative lectionary, this journey that we're taking in this school year from the fall at the beginning of the Bible, and we're working right through the Bible until the spring when we'll be finishing with the book of Revelation. And in that sermon, talking about Scripture and the biblical story, we did a quiz and kind of found out actually how little we actually know about the Bible. And one of those quiz questions was, what are the Ten Commandments? Well, we just learned that in the children's sermon today. Another quiz question was, where in the Bible do we find the Ten Commandments? And here it is, Exodus 20. The Ten Commandments, a part of God's law. So what is God's law, and what does it have to do with us? Well, Martin Luther, the great reformer of the church in the 16th century, coined the theological principle, law and gospel. And Luther said that all the Scripture can be divided into these two categories, law and gospel. So, what is God's law? Well, according to Luther, there's two uses of God's law, and the first use is a civil use. Now, Judge Dawson and I have this in common, that it's the civil use of God's law is a lot like our civil use of the law. That laws are in place, at least in theory, to protect us and keep us safe. The reason we have traffic laws or stop signs or stoplights is to give order to our world, to keep us safe. Well, God's law functions in the same way, at least according to the civil use of the law, the first use of the law. That God gives us the law to give us order. In essence, to protect us from ourselves. The first use of the law is a civil use. The second use of the law is a theological use of the law. And Luther says that the law of God functions like a mirror. That we look at the law of God and we recognize ourselves as sinners. We look in the mirror and we recognize ourselves as human beings. We recognize ourselves as fallen short of the glory of God and what God has called us to do in Jesus Christ. This mirror, according to Luther, then turns us. When we recognize ourselves as sinners, we turn to the gospel. We turn to God. We turn to Jesus Christ. And this is the point. This is the point of the law. This is the point of Christian education. It's the point of confirmation or Bible study. That we have a foundation of faith. That when our lives are in trouble, when we need something, that we have some place to turn. Well, a month ago when I introduced the narrative lectionary, I shared this quote from the beginning of my Bible. I've handwritten this. It says, "You will believe in something, and it will give shape to the way you live. What will give shape and authority to your life? If you're going to survive, you're going to cling to something. What will it be?" Now the question is, where do we turn when we need to turn to something? Now I appreciate my friendship with Judge Dawson. I appreciate our discussions, arguing the finer points of the law. And I appreciate and respect civil law. But there is a difference between civil law and God's law. In civil law, we believe in blind justice. We believe in the balanced scales of justice. In fact, the statues of Lady Justice outside the U.S. Supreme Court building, Lady Justice is wearing a blindfold symbolizing blind justice and holding the scales of justice completely balanced. In civil law, we desire balance, don't we? You break the law, you pay the price. The punishment fits the crime. You get what you deserve. But with God's law, it's not about blind justice. It's not about getting what you deserve. It's about grace, the undeserved favor of God. In civil law, we desire a balance, a crime, a punishment, an equal and fair exchange. But with Christ, we receive what Luther calls the joyous exchange, where Jesus willingly goes to the cross to pay not for his sin, but for your sin. And in this exchange, Jesus takes our sin and he gives forgiveness. Jesus takes our despair and he gives hope. Jesus takes our punishment, our death, and in exchange he gives life. Is this fair and balanced? No. But nonetheless, this is what God gives. This is the difference between civil law and God's law. You break the law, but the price has already been paid. You see, this is the meaning of law and gospel. The law is sin, the gospel is forgiveness. The law is despair, the gospel is hope. The law leads to death, the gospel is the life that we have in the risen Christ. I love this journey that we're on through the Bible. And more specifically, I love studying the Old Testament. Sometimes as Christians, we overlook the Old Testament. There's a perception that because we live into the new covenant that we have in Jesus Christ, that we don't believe in the Old Testament. And of course, this isn't true. Sometimes people think that the law is bad and the gospel is good, or the law is the Old Testament and the New Testament is gospel. Well, this isn't completely true either. We always hold the Old Testament and the New Testament together. Without the Old Testament, the New Testament doesn't make sense. Without law, gospel doesn't make sense. And law and gospel are found throughout God's work in Scripture. This is probably my favorite part of the Ten Commandments from Exodus 20. God says, "I am the Lord. I am a jealous God, punishing the children for the iniquity of their parents to the third and fourth generation for those who hate me, but showing steadfast love for 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." There is power in sin. There is power in evil and despair and grief and sorrow. But I find incredible hope in knowing that the power of sin is not nearly as powerful as the power of forgiveness. The power of despair is not nearly as powerful as the power of hope. The power of death is not nearly as powerful as the power of life. The love of God is not 3 or 4 times more powerful than evil. It's 1,000 times more powerful. This is the power of the gospel. You see, the laws in place to keep us in relationship with God. And from the beginning, I like this part. Where does the Bible begin? This isn't a trick question. At the beginning, we know this because it's the first words in the Bible. It says, in the beginning. And in the beginning, God creates. This all happens on the first page. Literally on the second page, it says, the fall of humans into sin. So God creates the entire world on the first page of the Bible. On the second page, what do? We fall out of relationship with God. And the rest of this Bible, all of these pages, is God calling us back into relationship with Him. We continue to fall, and God continues to bring us back into relationship. We fall, and God picks us up. We fall again, and God picks us up. We continuously fall out of relationship with God, and He continuously brings us back into relationship with Him. In today's text, God says, I lift you up on eagle's wings and I bring you to myself. I love this image of God lifting us up and bringing Him to Himself as God calls us back into relationship with Him. May the law of God give us order, turn us from sin, and bring us back into relationship with a loving God. To God be the glory now and forever. Amen.